Okay, thanks. Right, so I'm Benedicta van Minnen. I'm the chair of the committee. Welcome. Thank you for coming in. I'm going to introduce the committee and then we'll just talk about the process of the interview. So I think we will start with Member Kaiser-Philander.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members. Good morning, Mrs. Philander. My name is Wendy Kaiser-Philander, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning. Good morning, all. I'm Leon van Wyk. I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning. I'm Thomas Walters. I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Donita Stevens, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning, Chairperson. I'm Khalid Said, and I'm a member of this committee.
Good morning. I'm Brett Heron. I'm a member of the committee.
Right, morning. So you'll get a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, and then when you're ready, go into your presentation. We give you 10 minutes for the presentation. Then after that, there is about 45 minutes left. We have 10 questions that members will ask you. So that's the procedure. Just note that because we are a parliamentary committee, this is being screened on YouTube. I think yesterday we had 5 people who viewed it for the whole day. So let's see how we do today. Maybe we can beat that. But yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. My name is Rochelle Philander. I'll introduce a little personal side of mine before I start my presentation. So I'm a mother of 3 beautiful daughters, married for the last 18 years. My daughters are advocates in their own right, so they are definitely probably going to be listening to this, and I'm probably going to get some severe feedback when I get home. I'm the director for Safeline Child Abuse Treatment and Prevention Center for the last 18 years. I started as a social worker. I was a new graduate when I started, and through the grace of God, yes, they were very, very committed in ensuring that they found someone that would really look after the children, especially in the field of child sexual abuse. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 18 years, fighting for the rights of children, having their voices heard, and predominantly in the field of child sexual abuse. So that's me. I am not nervous, but I want to show you the best side of me in terms of what I've done over the last 18 years. Yeah. Right.
Just in terms of the presentation, when you want the slides changed, you can just say next, and our procedural officer will make sure that happens.
Okay, all right. So we'll start with that first slide. So I'm Rochelle Philander. Thank you for the opportunity to attend today's interview. Today's presentation will cover the following: vision for the role of the Commissioner for Children, including core functions and priorities, the essential qualities and competencies required for an effective commissioner, and proposed strategies for achieving these goals, including stakeholder engagement and overcoming challenges. So children are the heart of our future, yet many faces challenges that prevent them from living safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives. In the Western Cape, issues like violence, poverty, poor education, transport, and lack of support continue to affect children every single day. Constant stress from violence, poverty, or abuse takes a role and a deep toll on children's mental health. Many suffer in silence, feeling alone and overwhelmed. I hold a social work degree from the University of the Western Cape and a master's in child and families. For 18 years, I've led Safeline Child Abuse Treatment and Prevention Center, working directly with thousands of children across the Western Province. This frontline experience has given me a holistic understanding of children's realities, not just their trauma, but also their resilience. I've seen the harm caused not only by perpetrators, but also by systems and institutions that fail to protect the very children they are meant to serve. This insight drives my passion to hold systems accountable, improve services, and ensure every child is protected, heard, and supported. This would continue to be my vision should I serve as the Western Cape Commissioner for Children. Further, to build a province where children can speak for themselves and be taken seriously. As a commissioner, my role would be to advocate for children's rights, amplify children's voices in decision-making, monitoring and evaluating service delivery, using data to strengthen policy and interventions, bridging the gap between children and government, and most importantly, addressing child's rights violations head-on. My priorities are keeping children safe, mental health and emotional support, and fighting for the most vulnerable. So there are essential qualities, I believe, and skills for a child commissioner. For me, a good child commissioner needs to be someone who truly cares about children and is ready to stand up for them. Even when it's hard, you need to be brave enough to speak out when things go wrong, but also calm and respectfully enough to work with. And especially when we have gatekeepers as institutions. Essential qualities of the Child Commissioner should encompass child-centered approach, integrity and independence, empathy and emotional intelligence, resilience and tenacity, and cultural sensitivity and inclusivity. Continual professional development has always been a priority in my career. To better understand how children experience the world, I trained in both person-centered approach and Gestalt model of play therapy. These methods strengthened my ability to build trust and connect meaningful relationships with children from all backgrounds. My work ethic is deeply rooted in service and integrity. As a registered member of the South African Council for Social Services Professions, I uphold the highest ethical standard and am committed to anti-discriminatory, inclusive practice that respects diverse cultures and identities. So in my role as the director of SafeLine, I ensure that these values are embedded in our policies and actively train both staff and board members to uphold it in practice. Ultimately, the role of the commissioner demands more than expertise. It requires someone who leads with heart, speaks with courage, and acts with purpose. For me, it's not about the title. It's about making a meaningful, lasting difference in the lives of children. The key competencies are expertise in child rights, strategic leadership, policy and research skills, communication and advocacy, collaborative working, and safeguarding and child protection knowledge. My academic foundation and work experience has deeply shaped my understanding of the child protection. From early in my career, I recognize that not all grow up in a safe environment, and many lack a trusted space to speak out. I've learned that when child feels safe and supported, they are far more likely to disclose the fears of trauma. In 2006, I joined SafeLine, and we were a very small organization only dealing with face-to-face counseling. I saw the limitations in this approach and envisioned a broader, more holistic strategy. So within a year, I developed comprehensive programs that empowered not just children, but also parents and educators to identify and respond and prevent child sexual abuse. This created a safety net for all children when speaking out. As the director of this NGO, I built a strong, well-trained team formed by partnerships. We emphasize the importance of understanding trauma-related behavior challenges and tailoring our services to the real lived experiences of children. Throughout my career, I've prioritized interdepartmental collaboration, recognizing that child protection is a shared responsibility. I've built working relationships with the Department of Social Development, Health, Education, Justice, and Community and Safety. By aligning SafeLine's programs with their mandate, we promote a truly integrated child-centered approach. As a visionary leader, I don't fix what is broken. I look ahead and I ask, how can we better for the next generation? My participation in forums on social development, GBV, crime allowed me to challenge ineffective systems and advocate for change where it matters the most in the lives of children. To achieve real measurable improvements in children's lives, I would focus on 7 core functions. I will only name and discuss 3. Put children's voices first, improve collaborative across departments, monitor and report progress. Create safe, regular spaces like youth forums and school visits where children can speak about their experiences. Use creative tools like storytelling or communicating radio to reach everyone. Building strong partnerships with health education, social development, and SAPs, joining planning to ensure no child falls through the cracks. Obviously, everything that I strategize, I have to find indicators to measure them. So I'll set clear, measurable indicators, publish quarterly and annually reports, regularly gather feedback from children and communities, adjust strategies based on real-world results. While the role of the Commissioner for Children is vital and full of purpose, it also comes with the real and persistent challenges. To make a meaningful progress, we must understand these obstacles and actively work to overcome them through collaboration, innovation, and persistence. So I've identified 7 challenges. I will speak to 3 of them. Lack of interdepartmental coordination. Government departments often work in silos with limited collaborative between sectors like health, education, and social development. This fragmentation weakens our collective impact on children's lives. Children's voices are overlooked. Too often, children are not consulted in decisions that affect them. Meaningful participation is essential. We must create platforms where children are heard and taken serious. Weak data and reporting systems. Inadequate data makes it difficult to measure progress, understand the scale of issues, or make evidence-based decisions. Without clear information, targeted interventions are compromised. And this we see on a daily basis in our NGO sector. One of those are Form 22s, which basically informs the Department of Social Development what has happened to a particular child in a community. And so many of us don't understand the Form 22s, which then interferes with even the data collection. So allow me to tell you a story. And this story is really going to encompass everything that a commissioner stands for, roles and responsibilities. So I'm going to share you a story with about a 13-year-old girl in grade 7. She was raped by a 13-year-old cousin. Too afraid to let anyone know and filled with shame and guilt, she remained silent. 9 months later, she gives birth in her home and rushed to hospital. And this case is about 1 month old. Her mother finds out for the first time that her daughter was pregnant, and then sadly, that she was raped. Mother and daughter is visited by a social worker from the Department of Health in hospital who listens to a story. And then on a piece of paper, she writes the name of an organization that she can find counseling. The social worker, never to be seen again. Through the support of another organization, the mother is empowered to take the young girl to a Tutuzela care center, where she is then consulted with and the matter is handed over to the Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit. The young girl, after giving a statement, reports that she was made to feel responsible for what happened. And she was asked the most embarrassing questions while giving her statement. The investigating officer decides to open up an inquiry and then continues to make it difficult for the young girl to receive consultation sessions with the prosecutor. After reporting to the school, when arriving at school, 2 weeks after she has given birth, for 1 week, no one realizes that she should not have been there until the HOD is informed about the matter. And she's so shocked that no one attended to the school policy in terms of learners coming back to school after giving birth. A lack of knowledge by professionals added to further embarrassing situations for the young girl. Through the advocacy of another social worker, the family eventually gets an appointment with the prosecutor, who turns everything around for this young girl. She's finally listened to, and she's finally understood. This story tells us that the most crucial role the commissioner will fulfill is to make sure that all children are treated fairly, protected, and respected, no matter where they come from or what their situation is. This is the role that's just not about holding a title. It's about making a lasting, meaningful impact in children's lives. In conclusion, safety and security don't just happen. They are the result of collective consensus and public investment. We own our children, the most vulnerable citizens in our society, a life free of violence and fear. And this was said by Nelson Mandela, our former president of South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, now we will be going on to the questions, and we will start with Member Heron.
Thank you. The first question is, what value does your previous job experience add to the role of the Children's Commissioner?
Over the last 18 years, I started off very comfortably in only counseling child victims of sexual abuse. And if anybody has experienced a broken child, you would know that it's not easy for them to open up and to talk about what has happened. And so various skills is really needed in terms of making sure that that particular child, firstly, speaks out, secondly, believes in themselves, and thirdly, starts developing coping mechanisms to deal with all those trauma that they've experienced. As I became the director of SafeLine, which is 16 years of that 18 years, I soon realized that the type of programs that you implement and write up has to speak to the needs of the children. If it doesn't speak to the needs of the children, it means nothing at the end of the day, because then we're just reinventing cycles that does not help children to speak out and then to heal. So the value that my current position has at my current work is that I will be able to monitor programs across the province and make sure that they are talking to the needs of children, that I'm able to go down on the level of children and create systems that will help them to talk through those systems to help understand what they are lacking in terms of their needs. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Member Kaiser-Philander.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. The second question, what are the three biggest challenges that children are faced with in the Western Cape? And how will you, as the Commissioner for Children, approach those issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Once again, my experience has really taught me that there's a huge amount of challenges that children face in the Western Province. Three of them, firstly, is nutrition. There are many children in our communities who go to bed hungry. Many children who don't even experience a breakfast, a lunch, or a supper. In my own environment at SafeLine, one of the things that we pride ourselves in is children walking in, and the first question we ask is, have you eaten today? Because no child who is hungry could ever go through any healing process that you want them to go through. You'll be talking to a brick wall, because the only thing that that child requires is the love and attention and food. And so I look at the province and I look at the dynamics of families, and I think about how children receive childcare grants. Now, in my environment and working with the Department of Social Development, it is very clear that in our low socioeconomic communities, our grandparents are the carers. Our parents, or the children's parents, are the one who are on substance abuse, they're not at home at all. They're doing TIC, they're doing everything other than looking after their child. Yet they are the people receiving the child care grants. Grandparents are A, not knowledgeable of how to deal with it. B, they're afraid to report it. And so I would try and create systems where children also, on the one hand, is able to speak out in terms of what is their growing up situation in their home. Are they eating? Are they being clothed? All of those aspects are important in terms of a child's development. And then awareness within our communities are so important. I also feel that policies that speak to the childcare, to the childcare grant, should be looked at. Who's receiving that grant? Why are they receiving it? What are they doing with it? What is the consequences of the child not in being enabled to use that childcare grant for what they truly need? So it is a reality that in our communities, grandparents are the forerunners in parenting children. And we should look at implementations that will allow them to feel supported and to feel comfortable in reporting that these children are not getting the child care grant. Also, we have lots of white elephant community centers in our communities that are not effectively used. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we'll look at how are children taken care of during school holidays, for example. During school, there's a feeding scheme at a school. So years ago, children went to school hungry, and eventually we evolved into having feeding schemes at school. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the feeding schemes stop when school stops. So during school holidays, there's no feeding schemes. There's only the auntie down the road who makes millipap for everybody and they all get together, which is also not a consistent situation that occurs. So using our community centers and running holiday programs where not only they are kept busy so that they can keep safe, but they're also then able to get a plate of food for the day at that community center. And people involved in making this happen would be our government departments, yes, the Department of Social Development. It would be our sponsors, our business people within our communities that we can collaborate with and determine whether they're able to assist in that type of implementation. So nutrition is a very important process for our children. I have not seen any child go through successfully our program without being fed. In our program, there's a trust building phase, a middle phase, and a termination phase. The trust building phase is such an important phase to look at during the healing process of that child. And that goes for the Commissioner's office. A trust building foundation has to be structured in order to have children, A, feel supported, feel nourished, and feel loved.
Thank you very much. Member Syed?
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you for your responses. Tying into the previous question, this one, I think it's you've spoken to some of it, but how do you propose to translate some of the concerns of the communities into practical solutions within the constraints of limited resources for the Office of the Commission?
Okay, so before I answer you, there was two more, which was education and safety, if you'd allow me to just answer that. So in terms of safety, the Western Province is filled with children who live in diverse communities. They experience violation, victimization. It's so sad when you look at international news and you hear that Delft is the highest murder little township in the Western Province, in South Africa, in the world. And so we really need to look at structures that protect our children. We formerly heard about the 1,000 days of a child being protected from conception to 2 years old. And that type of process and that type of securing children in our community, looking at our neighborhood watch, our walking bus, looking at structures in our community that could really assist in determining the safety of children. In terms of education, our children in our low socioeconomic communities are very used to going to school where there's overcrowded classes, 40 to 50 children in a class. Educators are expected to educate, but they also are expected to life skill. They are expected to really look at children and find out what's bothering them that affects their performance levels. And so we need to look at how children are treated within the school environment based on these type of behavioral issues that comes out. Child sexual abuse, learner-on-learner sexual abuse is very high in schools at present. Does our policies and our mandates speak to learner-on-learner sexual abuse? Educators, are they familiar with the Abuse No More manual? Do they even know where it is? A couple of years ago, while doing my master's degree, I researched 32 schools in Cape Town, and there was not one school who could tell me where the Abuse No More manual was. I approached principals, HODs, they didn't even know it existed. But yet my research shows twofold, because the Department of Education Safe School says, no, but we give training on Abuse No More manuals. We give training to all educators. Educator says, no, but we haven't received any training. I don't even know what the manual looks like. And that manual is so important because it talks about child abuse. It talks about teacher and learner. It talks about learner and learner. So those are the kind of guidelines that we really need to look at and determine. And I'm not into reinventing wheels. If I see there is something that is present, I will determine and monitor whether it's working. And if it's working, but it's not working effectively, how do I literally put things in place to make sure that we use what is existing and create and strengthen it in a more effective way? So in terms of the community getting involved, am I understanding you correctly, sir? Yeah, in children's protecting child protection.
No. What I've indicated was community concerns, not their involvement. So how do you propose to translate identified community concerns? So the community raises concerns. How do you translate those concerns into practical solutions? Not necessarily their involvement. Thank you.
Yes. So firstly, communities love getting together to talk. They love public meetings. But somehow, when we get to the public meetings, they are not very structured. And so we end up having fights with one another, and people start insulting one another, and departments are being clashed against one another because we can't seem to find a consensus, A, and B, because they're not being listened to effectively. And so, in my view, listening is an important skill that the commissioner's office is going to need. We're going to need to be part of the process of talking. And if we find that community members are, because community members have all the information, they know what's going on in their community in terms of violence, gang violence. They know where the drug lords are. They know what's happening in terms of TIC, who's selling it, who's not selling it. So there's a variety of knowledge out there. And we have to find a way to use our skill to try and actually bring it out with children. Even our children in our communities are knowledgeable about what's going on. And so how do we listen to them? How do we get their voices heard? So we can use things like public meetings. We can have digital platforms because we have very experienced and knowledgeable parents out there who knows how to use digital platforms. I don't know if I'm the only one that has to tell my daughter, can you please show me how to get rid of this thing on my phone? But I think everybody else knows how to use WhatsApp. Everybody knows how to use Instagram. Everybody knows how to use Facebook. So there are various platforms that we could create to make sure that parents' voices are heard, that communities' voices are heard. And once again, I have to iterate that when we talk about the ineffectiveness of service delivery in our communities, it's our parents, our grandparents who are the voices. I served on the Mitchells Plain Hospital board for 2 terms. And the beauty about the hospital board is that it's filled with community presence. So you're not sitting there to talk about medical advice that you need to give doctors and instruments and resources that they need. You actually sit there and you talk about the challenges that the community is experiencing in terms of service delivery of the particular hospital. And I've always wondered, when I sat there, I would wonder, why are we all just adults sitting here? Because it's not adults who are only using our hospitals, for example. So how do we get concerns from our children? Because our children use the trauma units, they get pediatric care, they get mental health care, and how are they treated? I know in my tenure at SafeLine, when we receive young girls who mentally have not coped, especially post-COVID, they have not coped with much of what they've experienced. We know that violence, gang violence, domestic violence, sexual offenses have all traumatic emotional scars on our young people. And so we find that they start going into depression and anxiety. And the worst case is self-mutilation. A lot of self-mutilation amongst young people. And not just only in the sexual abuse sector, but in all child protection sectors. And one of the sad things is that you struggle to determine where to refer them to. And so everybody says refer them to the day hospital, trauma unit. So what do you do when you're at the trauma unit? They just get a piece of paper and they say they must go for counseling. But not everybody knows that public hospitals has mental health desk. And if communities are aware of those, then those are the kind of things that they can approach before the child even leads to self-mutilation. So I think building awareness amongst the communities in terms of how to use services in the community is important. And this we can also do via digital platforms, via public meetings. It's important for the community to know that these services are available to them, and this is how you can use them. And so when people they don't have knowledge about how to use something, they become fearful. And so we find that a lot of the communities of Mitchell's Plain come knock on our door and it's not because of sexual abuse, they come knock on our door because my child, I found that she's self-mutilating herself. And so what do? Fearful of going to the day hospital, they look for someone to journey with them. And I think that's one of the things that we've had over the years in our community, which is community people who belong to the neighborhood watch, who back then belonged to the walking bus, who we've even got our ward committees. But if they're not used effectively enough, one needs to monitor how do they journey with the community of Mitchell's Plain, for example. How do they journey with those people so that their voices can be heard? So ultimately, at the end of the day, the Commissioner's Office is about making sure that there's child participation and also making sure that the child's voice is heard. But I always say, and I want to conclude your question, my answer to your question on this, is that children and adults, we have an innate ability to have resilience. So we are resilient people. Children are more resilient than adults, in fact. So they can go through trauma and reach healing process very quickly if they are taken through an effective process. But here's the thing. They are resilient, but they're not miracle workers. And so they can't make the nurse or the social worker or SAPS or FCS do their job the way they should be doing it. And so those are the kind of things that actually then just stunt the growth of any child in terms of speaking out and healing in our province. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member Stevens?
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Philander.
Yes.
Given that monitoring and reporting are the aspects of the Commissioner, how would you go about in raising awareness to the departments and executive? What monitoring tools will be implemented? And how would you manage a situation where government departments or the executive do not want to cooperate with the Office of the Commissioner? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. All right. So in terms of the Commissioner's Office, it's independent from government departments. And so the office has a responsibility to investigate, to monitor, and to report to Parliament. So yes, it's a situation where the office will find itself in deep waters with departments if they are coming up against things that have been here for years now, policies that's been there for years, programs that's been created and been initiated and executed for years already. And so now here you come as the Commissioner's Office and you're doing this monitoring and you want to make changes. And yes, and so you're going to have people who are going to come up against you. So I believe that there are certain principles that the Commissioner's Office should maintain. Firstly, that is transparency. So in the organization that I work in as an NGO, so we are basically governed by the Department of Social Development. So social development has their own mandate. And their mandate is to make sure that we report on a quarterly basis to determine what is transpired in our organization. They also have a monitoring and evaluation team that comes out to make sure that what you've said is what you've done. So in terms of government departments, they all have those mandates. They all need to know what was plowed in comes out, what money was given in must come back out in terms of your outcomes and your indicators. And so at the end of the day, I would say that the most important person in this entire process of the Commissioner's Office is the child. And so I would have to set up monitoring tools to make sure that we speak to the needs of the child. So NGO sector and everyone is not completing quarterly reports unnecessarily, and it just lands up at social development's office and sit there. The commissioner's office, I would assume, would have the opportunity to look through those type of monitoring tools that they have and use the information that they have to determine whether the Children's Act is actually being executed on the ground level. So, for example, the Child Care Act speaks about parenting responsibilities. It speaks about fostering. It speaks about mandatory reporting. And so all of those monitoring aspects that the government departments have set down are ones that we have to monitor as well and investigate and determine whether it is what it says. And then we have to have platforms where we actually have this information going out, because the most important people who needs to hear this are our children. Because if we don't have that sense of transparency with our children, then we're not going to create a safe environment for children to actually come to the commissioner's office and work alongside the commissioner's office to talk about ways in which their needs can be met. So I believe that monitoring tools and indicators are very important in terms of how children experience different services should be monitored. And so I would work in collaboration with the government departments to determine what their outcome was, and then determine whether it's according to the Children's Act, and then determine whether there's been any changes since the last monitoring, because I think that's important. We can't be going from this financial year to the next financial year, but not compare that financial year to the previous financial year, and not compare stats. We can't say that for the year of 2023, 787 children were murdered, but we're not comparing it to 2022 to determine whether we are actually making a difference out there with all the programs. Department of Social Development alone has 8 baskets of services. And so there is a multitude of services provided to children. But we have to, as the Commissioner's Office, we will need to then monitor, investigate, research, advocate, and then also to recommend whether there are any changes. And I think the office being independent might be a scary one for a lot of people, but we need to show as the office integrity. We need to show courage as well. We need to show empathy as well. And so by doing all of that, we're standing up for the rights of our children. We are not afraid to speak out against any government department. It is our responsibility to make sure that where we monitor and investigate and where we are assessing that things are going wrong, that we speak out, because we're speaking out on behalf of the children.
Great. I just want to remind you about time. We've got 20 minutes left.
Okay.
So just bear that in mind.
Okay.
Question 5, Member van Wyk.
Yes. How would you ensure that the Children's Act is implemented on the ground for the benefit of children? And perhaps if you can give a practical example.
Okay. So firstly, the Commissioner's Office is mandated through the Western Province Constitution, Section 78. And so there we already mandated in terms of what we need to do. In terms of the Children's Act, like I said previously, there are very clear indicators which we have to cover, which is fostering, mandating, reporting, and parental responsibilities. And as I know, every department has their own monitoring tool that they use for the child protection sector. And so we shouldn't allow those monitoring tools to become white elephants sitting on someone's desk. And so the Commissioner's Office would use that type of information to determine whether the Children's Act is actually being affected on ground level. So in terms of parenting programs and empowering parents, in terms of mandatory reporting, Form 22s are very important. In terms of making sure that everybody who is working with children have actually been vetted, Form 29s, which is in the Children's Act. So those are the kind of those are the kind of monitoring indicators that I would look at to determine whether the Children's Act is being affected on ground level.
Thanks very much. Question 6, Member Walters.
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
Yeah. So I'm going to use the word again, transparency. I feel that at the end of the day, the Child Commissioner's office is independent, and it does have to report to Parliament, but does not have to report to government departments. However, there has to be a collaboration between the Commissioner's office and the government departments. I do feel that there are platforms that can be used to do that in order to ensure that the children are the ones that receive the information. So I know that the previous commissioner had a child monitors project, which I thought was a brilliant project. I feel that one can use the city's junior councils to incorporate into that system. And simply because the more forums and the more committees we have for children, the more information will transcend down and the more community members will understand what the Commissioner's office is about. In terms of government departments clashing with one another, well, that will require trust building. It will require the Commissioner's office to literally form strong networking, stakeholder relationships so that we get to understand each other and so that we get to not tramp on each other's toes, but literally understand why certain aspects are important, why certain things were assessed or investigated and findings were brought out. So I believe that collaboration, transparency, and creating tools which will allow children to see the work that the Commissioner's office does will create that trust.
Thank you, Member Heron.
Thank you. This question follows on from your comment now about the child monitors. It's got two parts. As Commissioner for Children, how do you view the child monitor program? And if you were to change it, how would you involve child monitors and the children sectors? And then secondly, how will you ensure that initiatives like the child government monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making processes on municipal government level? Did you get all of that?
I think I got all of it, yes. We live in a diverse world, in a diverse community. One child is not the same as the other. One child's battle is not the same as the other. And so I feel the child monitor program should be set up with children across the metro, children who come from various backgrounds, not just our low socioeconomic communities, but children who actually even go to schools where there are societal clubs and all kinds of things that some children don't experience in their schools. And then, like I said before, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel, so that I do know that the Western Province does have other forms of youth advisory groups and focus groups. And I will bring them on board in terms of really looking at how together children can run this province in terms of their own safety, their own needs be met. So in terms of, I said earlier also, that being on the Mitchells Plain board, we should look at service delivery and determine how can these monitors be accessible to those boards in terms of sitting and looking at goals and looking at how should service delivery affect children, having the children's voice come out. In terms of working alongside the Commissioner's office, so I'll be very honest with you, I was like very confused when I heard okay, so children are working in the Commissioner's office. I'm very confused. Is this a day-to-day job or what is this? Or is it child labor? What's going on here? And then I read up on it and I started feeling it and started understanding. Together, the Commissioner's office is about togetherness, together with the child, not creating and implementing things that the child is not even interested in. So I think that children, once this committee or this focus group is up and running, that they should look at their own monitoring tools, their own indicators, and together we will build them so that we can try and find a way for service delivery to actually impact positively on our children in our communities. But diversity is a very important aspect there. And in terms of diversity, it's not just background, it's also ages. Different children of different ages experience the same thing differently. And so they will also experience services differently. So, yeah.
Makazi Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. Question 8. Given the high levels of trafficking, of child trafficking in the Western Cape, how would you propose that the Office of the Commissioner for Children would seek to address that?
Right. The Office of the Commissioner and the staff should have a very broad understanding, firstly, of human trafficking. I think for many of our communities, when we talk about human trafficking, they've got one thing in mind, and that was the child was taken from point A to another city or another country. But that's not the be-all of human trafficking. I've worked with mothers from Muizenberg who traffic their daughters for 5 rands for pleasures of other people. And so I know that parents always say, "So kan jou kinders alles leer?" But when it comes to the point of actually implementing what they were taught, they don't. They go with a stranger. They take the sweet, for example. They do those kinds of things. And so I feel that the Commissioner's Office should really focus tremendously on awareness of human trafficking, creating awareness, using digital platforms once again, using brochures, using child-friendly material, storytelling. I think there are many children who survived human trafficking, who can tell their story, who can say how it initially happened. And then to look also at our policies in place in terms of our justice system. Some children are found almost immediately, others are found after long, others are not found. But what are we doing as the department, as that department, to make sure that things move faster, that SAPs move faster? So the knowledge in terms of the different sectors involved with child protection and human trafficking, that is something that the Commissioner's Office has to monitor and investigate and assess. How well is it running? They always say there's so many hours before we give up and say, no, the child is now gone that long, the child must be dead. So I think that looking at how service delivery happens within our province, quick enough to make sure that children are saved, or even, and we have Tutuzela care centers who can tell you many stories of young women, young girls, 13, 14-year-olds, who were eventually found in homes in Woodstock, in Salt River, even a house in Mitchell's Plain. And so it just determines on how our policies and how the Commissioner's Office is going to have an oversight role in terms of how the departments also respond to those kinds of systems.
Member Syed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the response.
Counting you guys now. But I see now you saw.
Last 2 questions, don't worry. We're nearly there. What steps would you take as a Commissioner for Children to address the lack of forensic support in sexual and child abuse cases? And could you provide an example of similar initiatives which you've led or supported in the past to improve responses and support for victims?
I think that the most important thing in my 10 at Safeline is stakeholder meetings, building that networking relationship with FCS, with Tutuzela Care Center, with SAPS, with counseling institutions. I think it's very important. I'm going to give a very simple example. We receive a referral form of a child. On that referral form, we determine whether Form 22 was completed. In other words, whether the Department of Social Development was informed, and then also the nature of the problem and whether the case was reported. And so we kind of know what the logistics look like. In terms of at SAPS, there's supposed to be a victim support room. The child is then taken to the victim support room. FCS then comes on board with a little black box. They then take the child to the Tutuzela Care Center. At the Tutuzela Care Center, well, now it's a one-stop. Before it was never a one-stop. But now at Tutuzela Care Center, you now have the district surgeon, you now have the social worker, you have someone to follow up, you have someone to refer. So in terms of the Commissioner's Office, it is so heartsore to see how children come to Safeline where a case was reported, but then it gets taken off the roll because forensics were not completed properly. Either A, most importantly, the child can't testify because the child's too young, or because the child is too traumatized, and so the child will have to go through counseling sessions in order to go through the emotions. Not to prepare them for court because we don't interfere in the court proceedings, but to make sure that the child goes through the emotions that they need to go through in order for that case to go back on the roll. And then you find incidences of DNA that's gone wrong. We've had many cases of parents coming in and saying that they had to let the person go because there was no DNA. So what happens in that situation? I think the Commissioner's Office would be responsible for monitoring those processes. Every step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, so that when we go onto our digital platforms and when we go onto our awareness programs where we are talking to the community, where we're talking to children, where we're talking to parents, we're able to say that this is definitely what is happening, that at the end of the day, there is a victim support room. That victim support room does have volunteers. SAPS does send it to FCS. FCS does go to Tutuzela Care Center, etc., etc. So I think it's about the Commissioner's Office knowing exactly what is supposed to happen and then monitoring whether it is happening in terms of forensics. I know that it's for children, it is a very, very, very it adds on to their guilt and their shame when they are told, but the evidence doesn't point that way, or forensics, something went wrong. And I look at my story that I told you earlier, in terms of how that 13-year-old went through processes of really feeling guilt and shame and feeling like it was her responsibility to have stopped it, and it was her fault that it happened in the first place. So dealing with forensics, it's important if we're looking at a more healthier community in terms of children.
Thank you. And the last question is from Member Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. How would you advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post-school life?
Yeah. So children with special needs, we have to firstly understand the entire process of intellectual disability, hearing disability, neurology, all of those things we need to understand as a Commissioner's Office. In terms of education, if we look at the setup of our schools, many of our schools are not, the infrastructure, firstly, doesn't speak to it. Secondly, I know of many children who are sitting in schools who should actually be in a special needs school. But what do we have? We have WCD with safe schools. Under safe schools, we have the social worker, we have the psychologist. And so the psychologist is responsible to move to the school in order to assess. So when a parent comes in and a parent says that my child is autistic, but my child is sitting in the middle of this class, it literally sometimes takes the parent more than 3 months to get help, if not that whole year, to get help from the department psychologist to actually assess what they can do with this child in order to assist this child. So I think firstly, educators also need to be knowledgeable. In terms of the autism, there's a teacher that just doesn't know how to use her skills to assist this child within that school setting. And so what happens? She ends up telling the child you're naughty, you're rude, and the child starts being bullied by other children in terms of what their attributes are or how they're performing in school. And there's a lack of support for that particular child in that school. So I think in terms of children with disabilities, we really have to look at, and the office of the commissioner will have to visit these schools, go and see what's happening in their classrooms. It's very easy for principals and HODs and school governing bodies and school management teams to report what's really not happening because, and I'm going to say it very clearly, schools work on a point system. And so I want to keep my point system very clear and very open. So, and we don't delve there, right? And so the child commissioner's office responsibility is going to be to delve there. And even if we're going to upset some people, at the end of the day, we are looking out for our children's best interest.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the presentation and going to talk to us this morning. In terms of going forward, we finish our interviews today, but then we'll be deliberating next week. So it'll be a couple of weeks, but we are sort of beginning to work through the system and you will get informed then in due course, which hopefully won't be too long.
All right. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you to all the members for allowing me this opportunity, and I actually enjoyed it. Thank you. Thanks.
Just one thing with the next candidate did receive a constraint for our certificate. It's very short, but I will just like the other one. Yes.
Let me just check whether I'm talking of the same person. Hang on. Yes, I'm just on that. It says Ms. Leppard is a very experienced presiding officers in the Children's Court. Unfortunately, a way of dealing with fellow professionals has earned her quite a reputation. One social worker mentioned it's very hearsay-ish and without detail. And I'm not. I don't feel strongly either way, but I'm actually doubting whether this is a genuine objection. It could be seen as a genuine objection. There's no detail. It's hearsay. It's vague. One professional. So, but Chair, I'm happy if you make a ruling in that regard. I just thought I should raise it.
I agree with you. I think this whole document is very, very anecdotal, but I'll come to you now. I do think, given the legislation, but it's something we should raise. But let's just hear what Member Syed said.
Chair, thank you. I want to agree with Member Walters on this one. I think it's very frivolous. In fact, even yesterday's one, the one on Reuters was also quite. It seemed like someone just had an issue, and now what I think maybe to handle this particular one, we could. You can say as an objection, but I think just to get a sense as to, and I think we can get that sense through how the person responds to interviews. How will they be when they are working with people? I mean, we can get that sense through the interviews. I also think it's a frivolous one, but maybe if just for compliance sake, you want to just put it to, that's also fine. Thank you.
I think for compliance, I will. But what I'll do then is I can do it without mentioning names. Do we then need to close for it, or should I just say an issue has been raised? What does the committee think?
Chair, I think we should just handle it exactly the same way as yesterday.
All right, so I'll just right at the end, just close it for whatever it takes. Good morning. I am Benedicta van Minnen. I am the chair of this standing committee. We're going to introduce the committee and then we'll just run through the procedure for the interviews, just so that you know right at the beginning how it's going to go. So let's start with Member Heron at that end.
Good morning. I'm Brett Heron, member of the committee.
Good morning. I'm Khalid Said, member of the.
Good morning. I'm Donita Stevens, and I'm a member of this committee.
Thomas Walters, a member of this committee.
Leon van Wyk, member of the committee.
Good morning. My name is Wendy Kaiser-Philander, and I'm a committee member.
Right, so you have a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, and then there is the issue of the presentation, for which you get 10 minutes. We then have approximately about 45 minutes over, and there are 10 questions that members of the committee will ask. And then just to note that this is on YouTube, so it is open to transparency, so people are able to watch it. Right, so I think you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then when you're ready, you can take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Start again. So I'm Denny Lepan. I'm a magistrate from Simonstown. The head of the office there, we've 4 magistrates. I've been there since 2020. Before that, I was a magistrate in Wynberg. I was there from 1997. I've been appointed to the bench since 1990. Before that, I was a public prosecutor. And in 1994, when my first son was born, I asked for a transfer from the criminal bench to the children's court because I'd had a passion for children. So I started as a commissioner for child welfare in Durban in the early 90s, and then took a transfer to Wynberg Court in 1997 when my husband was transferred here. So I've been working in the field of child protection for the past 30 years. It's my passion. As the magistrate in the children's court section, it's been possible for me to help children by identifying problems and trying to address them with the help of the social workers. We make orders for intervention in respect of children to try and relieve their problems. Sometimes we have to make orders ordering people who have failed to render services to children to appear before the court to give reasons for failing to render those services. We sometimes have to identify what particular needs a child has. And in that regard, one of my passions has been assisting children with educational problems because we've discovered that the majority of our children who display behavioral problems do so because they've got learning problems and therefore become disinterested in classwork because they're simply not coping. And we've discovered that children are not assessed in time to establish whether they are coping with classwork, and then at times have to issue orders for their assessment or for some intervention. We're quite aware of the constraints in the Department of Education. I believe there are only 64 social workers in the Department of Education, and very, very few educational psychologists. And I've spoken to headmasters. I've had the opportunity to call them to court to have discussions about particular problems in a school. Earlier this year, I had 2 sets of headmasters there, and I've attended the headmasters forum. It's the Professional Principals Forum meeting to discuss what we can do about that. So I know that they have constraints, and one of my tasks, one of my focuses would be, if I did get this job, is to focus on that. And I see Ms. Nomdu also identified that as one of her concerns. I see she highlighted that in the last report she did. So I believe I've been waiting for this job for many, many years, and can't wait to actually be able to do it one day.
Right. Would you like to then take us through the presentation If you need to change the slides, our procedural officer can just do that for you. Just ask her to move on. Thanks.
I have a copy of it, so I should just read from our copy. So what I've done is I've broken it up into the sections that I was asked to speak to in my little email. So the first point would be my vision for the role of Commissioner for Children, including core functions and priorities. Then I took you to the core functions and priorities as set out by the relevant legislation, that is section 78 of the Constitution of the Western Cape, which says that which establishes this office and states that the Commissioner must assist the Western Cape government in protecting and promoting the interests of children in the Western Cape, in particular as regards to health services, education, welfare services, recreation, amenities, and sport. So the priority of the Commissioner is clearly to protect and promote the interests of children in these areas. And in the Western Cape Commissioners Act describes the Commissioner's core functions in sections 6 to 16. It'll be known to all of you by now. Monitoring the impact of provincial services and policies, investigations in respect of anything that affects children within the province, research aimed at the development of policies and practices that are in the best interest of children, education of the public legislation, agreements and treaties that affect children, lobbying key decision makers and making recommendations concerning laws and policies, advising and making recommendations to organs of state or persons and requiring them to report back, and then reporting to the provincial parliament. And throughout this, there is also an emphasis on the voice of the child. My vision for this role. I see the Western Cape Children's Commissioner as a public protector of children in this province. We have serious problems affecting our children in this province, especially in respect of education, drug addiction, gangsterism, and poverty. Therefore, in exercising her functions, the Commissioner should actively engage in scrutinizing the well-being of our children and act efficiently and fearlessly to find solutions for the problems identified. This is a job that requires the incumbent to go into schools, hospitals, youth centers, and prisons and ask difficult questions. In other words, to get his or her hands dirty and to be brave enough to make recommendations that may be unpopular. The Commissioner would also utilize existing organizations and resources, including state organs, NGOs, and universities, to assist with information gathering and to help find appropriate solutions. The Commissioner would also call on existing partners and that have been established through previous networking. Whereas the Commissioners and presiding officers in children's courts attempt to address problems that they identify in children, as I mentioned before, by issuing orders, they lack the power to assist the wider community of children within the province with long-term solutions. Every order we issue relates to a particular child, and we can go no further than our area or the child that appears before us. The Western Cape Commissioner for Children, however, has the power to make recommendations to Parliament regarding policy decisions which can address those needs on a wider scale and long-term for the benefit of all children in the province. So it's a powerful position, and the Commissioner should not be afraid to use his or her powers. Regarding the essential qualities and competencies required for an effective Commissioner, this is also set out in the Act. And Section 3 of the Act requires the Commissioner to be a person who has a proven, specialized knowledge of or relevant professional experience or an academic record in public policy, human rights, or issues affecting children. But I would suggest that the following qualities and competencies are also required for an effective Commissioner: passion, courage, and tenacity. The protection of children is not always as rewarding as one would expect it to be, particularly when dealing with damaged, angry adolescents in often hostile communities. One needs a deep love and passion for children to overcome resistance to change within the child, family, community, and even government departments. The Commission needs enthusiasm and energy Because of the serious challenges in our province, there's a lot of work to be done. And bearing in mind the 5-year tenure of the Commissioner, relatively little time to achieve this. You need people skills and networking ability. The ability to get along well with people and to identify and collaborate with stakeholders and networking partners is essential. And this is particularly important because I believe there are budgetary constraints to this office. Management skills are critical. The ability to motivate and optimally utilize personnel and to manage and coordinate human, budgetary, and infrastructural resources. The Commissioner needs a knowledge of the law and policies because we are a creature of statute and we have to apply various laws and international treaties in the execution of duties. And lastly, information analysis and report writing skills. These are important as the Commissioner is required not only to investigate and monitor, but also to issue recommendations and write reports for Parliament. I'd like to add that I've looked at the chronicles and reports of Ms. Nomdu. They are absolutely fantastic, the most beautiful reports. And I believe she's very fortunate to have had those skills. And I should strive to match her skills in that regard. So my proposed strategies for achieving these goals. I find it encouraging that the Act mentions cooperative relations with government departments, organizations, and the public and private sector. I believe these relationships are vital for us to be able to protect our children effectively. Although there are many role players in the field of protecting children's rights, they generally act in silos alongside one another, without consultation and collaboration, often resulting in the duplication of certain services and the under-delivery of others. You literally have organizations that assume that someone else is taking care of a problem, whereas it's simply not being dealt with. I'm, for instance, as I mentioned before, very concerned about the high school truancy and high dropout rate, which is largely as a result of the high percentage of alcohol and drug-affected children who consequently have profound learning difficulties. These children do not have adequate access to scholastic assessments and treatment, nor are there appropriate school placements available. Urgent intervention through stakeholders' engagement between the Departments of Education, Social Development and Health is vital, and this should be one of the key focus issues of the Commissioner. I'm also concerned about the lack of extramural and sports activities available at public schools in low-income areas, which leads to children who have no after-school supervision because of their working parents becoming involved in unhealthy activities. These schools are often surrounded by affluent areas with well-resourced schools and sports facilities. The area that I live in, Noordhoek, is a case in point. You have very, very poorly resourced schools in Masiphumelele and Ocean View, with high-class international schools like the Generation School right on its doorstep, and the Silver Mine Academy. The Commissioner could facilitate collaboration between the schools to enable the sharing of facilities and resources, as well as to engage the Departments of Sports and Recreation in this regard. Many communities have individuals or small groups who run programs, example, literacy, sport, or after-school programs for which they get no funding or recognition. So I would encourage social workers and school principals to identify and upskill these small programs so that these can provide community-based services to children, especially where the schools are under-resourced. Local business communities could also be involved or could assist in funding. In other words, the community should be encouraged to heal itself and benefit from these types of public-private collaborations before or even instead of approaching the Department of Social Services. And this will also create sustainable solutions within communities that can be carried forward. Educating the public and government departments about the benefits of such collaborations would also be one of the functions of the Commissioner. My conclusion, so I personally believe that there are not many people in this province who have worked exclusively in the field of protection of children's rights or been engaged in interdepartmental collaboration for as long as I have. I've been in the field for 30 years. I've acquired a wealth of relational, experiential, and intellectual capacity and capital. I've already established relationships with various organizations, government departments, and universities. And I'm confident that I can build on and expand the existing relationships as well as forge new relationships in order to optimally achieve the goals of this office. So I believe I have the essential qualities and competencies necessary to be the commissioner and effectively promote and protect the rights, needs, and interests of our children in all areas of society within this province.
Thank you very much. And for the first question, I will hand over to Member Heron.
Thank you. The first question is, what value does your previous job experience add to the role of the Children's Commissioner?
I think I've mentioned it in my presentation. I have knowledge. I know what the problems are. I know the role players. I've identified schools and communities in my area that have problems, so I know what the problems are. And I have networking partners. It's very easy for me to establish networking partners in other areas. So one of the things I would do, for instance, is immediately establish contact with my fellow presiding officers in the children's courts. I am part of a family forum where we meet on a quarterly basis. I know what the problems are in other areas as well. So the idea would be to contact them, find out who their organizations are, and then build on that.
Thank you very much. And then to Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much. Chairperson, question number 2. What are the 3 biggest challenges that children are faced with in the Western Cape? And how will you, as the Commissioner for Children, approach those issues? Thank you, Chair.
I'd say the first one is education. We have real problems identifying educational needs. The second one would be poverty. I should actually switch them around. The biggest one would be poverty, because if you have parents who are financially well equipped enough, they will make sure that their children get into top schools. The people that we deal with, the people that we need to protect primarily, are children in poorer communities where their parents simply don't have the financial resources to have a child assess themselves and to send the child to a better school. So I put poverty on top and then education underneath that. The other problem is broken families, I believe, where we have a single parent family and there's no one to assist the single parent. So that in conjunction with poverty creates enormous problems. Many of our children also don't have, so it's a fractured family, essentially. Many of our children don't have a single parent caring for them, are being cared for by grannies, older grannies. I find it heartbreaking when we place children in older grandmothers' care who cannot read or write. I had a case yesterday where the little girl told me that she can't read. I think she's in grade 9. How she got there is a miracle. She's 16 in grade 9. And when I spoke to the social worker about what assistance there is for her, obviously the first question I ask is of the granny, do you sit and read with her? And she said, Ma'am, I can't read. Are there any other school-going children in the house? No, it's just the 2 of us. So we've had to put her in touch with, it was just amazing. I had another case at court where the foster mother was an LSEN teacher. And the first thing I asked the social worker when she arrived at court is, so we'd sent her, somebody had made a reading program available at school. She was assessed by a school psychologist, which is a miracle, who said that she should identify a reading program. So I wanted to know whether she'd benefited from that. And there was other foster mother at court who was an LSEN teacher, and they then asked her to sit with a child and let her read a piece and assess her. So, and then we established what her difficulties were. We actually just get someone else to sit in front of us and read with her to find out that she's mastered short words, but not longer words, and has not a book in the house. There's not a book in her house. Doesn't belong to a library. So, yeah, would be those three things: education, poverty, and fractured families.
Member Syed.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. My question is, how do you propose to translate some of the identified community concerns into practical solutions within the constraints of limited resources? We all know that the Office of the Commissioner has limited resources. So within that context, how do you propose to it? Thank you.
I mentioned earlier that there are community organizations. So I believe that one should identify community organizations and empower them to assist the child. Involve the business community to do some sponsorship. Do you know, I was a member of the governing body of Ottery Youth Centre for many, many years, for nearly 20 years. And at some point, they lost their funding with the Department of Social Development when there was that transfer from schools of industries to youth centres. And the only budget they had was the budget they got from the Western Cape Education Department to pay for schooling. There was no money for childcare workers. And that headmaster, Mr. Mardek, they were situated in Plantation Road in Ottery. He got the local business community involved. And they had open days. They had, for instance, film shoots on the property, etc., to raise funds. I've seen in practice how for almost 10 years, an organization kept going without a budget. There is a way to do it without a budget. You network. I've never had a budget. I do not even take petrol money from the state, but I've attended meetings in the community. You don't need a budget for that. You need to identify people. People love being involved. Years ago, when I was in Wynberg, Cape Town Child Welfare was a very vibrant organization at the time. They had a project called Isola Bantwana, Eye on the Child, in the Hanover Park, Manenberg area. They knew that there were grannies in the area, and grandpas, by the way, in the area who were concerned about children. We got them on board. We started a little project. We trained them to be eyes on the child, so they would be able to see a child in need and take a child off the street or take a child in and phone somebody, phone it after our social worker or whatever. So what we did is we trained members of the public on the Child Care Act, and so that they could identify what is a child in need of care and protection, and we created safe homes. There was not 1 cent available for that project. I had to pay for my own T-shirt. And it was fantastic. And the other day when I cleared up my desk in Wynberg, I found these tests that I did it on Saturdays. You go out, you speak to the people, you train them, you hand out notes, you let them write tests, you go home and you mark them, you feel fantastic. You don't always need a budget. You need people.
Thank you very much. Member Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. Given that monitoring and reporting are the aspects of the Commissioner, how would you go about in raising awareness to the department and executive, and what monitoring tools will be implemented? And how would you manage a situation where government departments or the executive do not want to cooperate with the Office of the Commissioner? Thank you.
As far as non-cooperate, I'll start there because that's the easy one. Because the Act gives us powers to investigate and make recommendations. And if they don't recommend, there's a penalty provision. So I'm not even worried about that. That's my field. What worries me a bit more is how about raising awareness to the department and the executive. I'm not so sure how involved I'll be with the executive, but I'll be involved with the departments as I am now. I know the heads of departments. You speak to them. I mean, I can tell you before I came here today, I spoke to one of the heads of departments who gave me a lot of encouragement. And it's just a matter of networking. I've never had any lack of cooperation. I mean, we've even subpoenaed people like Dr. Robert MacDonald, who to court to, when we've had a place of safety fee issue or a placement issue, and he's come to court. One feels so bad about taking this man out of his day, but he's being polite about it. We meet outside court, we have a little chat, we solve things, and off they go. And then, and what monitoring tools should there be? I actually have no clue at the moment, except that I suppose it would be establishing network partners and somebody within that we can speak to within the different departments. I think one is going to have to give them key objectives to achieve, and there's going to have to be regular checking in on those objectives. So I think that the Commissioner is going to have to very clearly communicate her objectives to the various departments and have a turnaround time and just check on those objectives, whether they've been achieved or not.
Thank you very much. Question 5, Member Fund.
Thanks, Chair. How would you ensure that the Children's Act is implemented on the ground to benefit children, and perhaps give a practical example?
Look, the Children's Act is being implemented practically daily by social workers. I can't even think of how. I suppose if somebody reports to me that there's a child in need of care and protection, that has fallen through the cracks, and that social workers have not been involved, then I could get involved. We could get involved. There's a system at the children. Look, it's all part of the. I think that'll be the education of the public. So Ms. Numdu has published chronicles giving information to the public. We could perhaps put it in there. The office of the Commissioner for Children is actually quite well known in the community, and myself and some of my colleagues had phoned Ms. Numdu about issues, asking her for help in the past. So I have no doubt that the public will phone us and contact us. So our information is out there, and if the public then gets hold of us, I wouldn't hesitate to pick up the phone and find out what's going on and refer people, as we're doing now anyway, to the children's courts. There's a system in the Children's Act, Section 53, which allows members of the public to apply directly to a children's court for assistance. They fill out a Form 2 and an affidavit. The file goes to the magistrate, who can then allocate the case to the social worker and place the case on the court roll. So if the court should find out that this, if the Commissioner should find out this is not happening, we could guide the public into the right direction, and I wouldn't have any hesitation in contacting the magistrates myself. We know each other in the Western Cape, wouldn't mind doing that. But it's definitely an education thing.
Thank you very much. Member Walters.
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
Difficult question. How would I protect the independence? I think our independence is guaranteed by the Act. And I'm as a sorry, no. How would I protect the integrity and ensure the independence?
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
Right. So look, because of what I do, I'm independent anyway, and in the current job that I'm performing, magistrates are independent, and it's part of the oath of office that we take. Independence is also entrenched in the Act. I wouldn't allow myself to be swayed, or I wouldn't allow my integrity and my staff's integrity to be interfered with. That goes at the heart of this position. If the Commissioner for Children is not untouched, is not uninfluenceable, she's completely ineffective. You've got to trust her. It's a position of trust. So I would protect it fiercely. whichever way I need to at the time. Defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner. I'm not sure it would be necessary. I think the incumbent should be strong enough to have integrity and not allow to be attacked. I mean, we answer to Parliament. I can't imagine that somebody in such a powerful position would have to defend her integrity. I really do see this as a role similar to that of the public protector. And if litigation is necessary at some stage, I'm assuming that we would be able to do that. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member Heron.
Thank you. This seventh question relates to how the current commissioners, or part of how the current commissioner is operating. So as Commissioner for Children, how do you view the Child Monitor program? And if you were to change it, how would you involve child monitors and the children's sectors? And the second part of the question is, how will you ensure that initiatives like the child government monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making process on a municipal or government level?
It's a very long one.
Want me to say it again?
Can I just generally speak to the question? So Ms. Numdu characterized her tenure as the voice of the child era, as it were. So she's established a very good foundation, and that is a very, very good start. So that child governance monitors are already exist. I'm not sure how she selected them. I think they should. One would have to. I'd obviously have to meet them and see how they were selected, see what areas they come from. The voice of the child is important, but it cannot overshadow the practical work that needs to be done. So, there's so much dirty work that has to be done at an adult level. We cannot lose sight of the voice of the child. So perhaps what we could do is, whilst we are doing the hard work of solving the real problems that there are, is we should consult with children throughout. The Children's Act requires us to consult with children where decisions are made that affects their well-being. So there should be a consultation process. How are we going to choose our monitors, I think, is a practical issue. What I think we should focus on is that if we identify an area that needs help, for instance, education, that'll inform where we get our voices from, where we get our monitors from, because we then select them to give us feedback about the education systems. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member Kaz-Philander.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Question number 8. Given the high levels of child trafficking in the Western Cape, how would you propose that the Office of the Commissioner for Children would address the issue? Thank you, Chair.
Firstly, liaise closely with children's courts in this regard. They are the ones that immediately deal with child trafficking. We are not collecting statistics of child trafficking. Each of the magistrates that I network with deal with some kind of child trafficking cases, and there's no database amongst us. So there could be, we could put in place a reporting mechanism which just similar to the Form 22, Section 110 reporting mechanism in the Children's Act, where there's a duty on certain people to report child abuse. Perhaps Section 110 could be amended to include, which it doesn't at the moment, the duty to on any person who deals with a child. That's a pity I left my Children's Act in the car. But there already are statutory imperatives that compel people who deal with or work with children to report child abuse to the Department of Social Development and to the police if necessary. So this could be included in that, which means that a presiding officer in the children's court or a social worker or a teacher or a community nurse, dentist, doctor, all those categories covered in Section 110 would also be obligated to report child trafficking. So that would be a legislative amendment that the commissioner could propose. But then, because that'll take a while, until that is done, and that's actually a very important point, we would then, and I'm going to make a note of it, put in place some kind of reporting mechanism where we get a monthly feedback. A little form is given to the different courts and we ask them to give us feedback about that.
Okay, Member Said, question 9.
Thank you very much. This is the second last question for the interview process. What steps would you take as Commissioner for Children to address the lack of forensic support in sexual and child abuse cases? And can you provide an example of similar initiatives that you've led or supported in the past to improve response and support for victims?
I hate to admit this, but I've been absolutely powerful in the past. I've done, so children go through the criminal courts for rape cases or sexual abuse cases, and where the children, where the criminal court decides not to prosecute because the child witness is too young or because they think that they don't have a reasonable prospect of success, those children remain in the children's court system, and the presiding officer can then hold an inquiry to determine whether in fact that child was sexually abused or physically abused. I've done a number of those trials. Some of them take very long. The longest one I took about 4 years to do, and then you're able to make a finding that the perpetrator did perpetrate the abuse and have his name put on to the National Child Protection Register. And in 90% of the cases we then don't. I didn't actually need DNA for that or forensic evidence for that. You see, the problem is at the labs. We're not even analyzing Mandrax tablets at the moment. It's going to be, I think what one should actually do is one should collaborate with the DPP's office, because their trials are being delayed because of problems at forensics. So I think that's an ideal example of a collaboration where this office speaks to the office of the DPP, even to the magistracy, get the commissioners for children on board, and we do a report about that. We present it to Parliament, and we see if Parliament can do anything about speeding up the analyses. But I do know that it's a funding issue, and we're going to need money for that. Nationally, we're going to need money for that. I must tell you that the other ways to skin a cat, you shouldn't give up just because you don't have forensic evidence. But yeah, certainly that's at a really high level.
Thank you very much. And our last question on this is from Member Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. I would advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post-school life.
That is my pet project.
Thank you.
Look, I've already established contact with the Principals Forum and been invited to another Principals Forum. We're going to, even through the Children's Court, we are very active in that regard. I really feel sorry for these principals when they come and testify and they say, as I said, there's 64 social workers. And in the Western Cape, school social workers, it's just not enough. But so what we encourage them to do is we encourage them, even if they can't get all of their own social workers, to report to the Department of Social Development. So again, it's a networking exercise. We must speak to these forums. I mentioned in my presentation how important it is to have meetings about that. I have no doubt that we're going to sort this out because it's my primary focus, and I've spoken to many people in specialized education, Dr. Enver Hassan, for instance, who I know they share our passion. It's a capacity constraint. We might have to collaborate with private practitioners. You know, these psychologists who charge 5,500 rand to rich parents to do assessments. If we could get some of them to do in an area to do pro bono assessments, we could speed that up as well. Yeah. Can I just mention something else? So we also need new schools. We need to lobby for new schools. Everybody knows that we have too few, even Brent Walters knows that we have too few schools of industries, for instance. They're hopefully going to build one in Ocean View next year. So what we do is the court fights and has the child assessed. And we eventually have the child admitted to a school of skills. And I really appreciate that they've come to the party in this regard. And then the foster parent says, I can't afford the 800 rand a month to take this child to a school of skills in Capita. And then you think, oh, what now? And then I say to the social workers, now you go and find out in your area how many kids go to a school of skills, and you lift club. They all put in 200 rand each or whatever, and get one driver to go and take all the kids there in the morning and all the kids back in the afternoon. So networking, collaboration, brainstorming.
Right, thank you very much. There's just one issue then in terms of the advertising process we just need to cover, but I am going to ask our procedural officer if we can just go off the YouTube link for that and just close the committee. I think that just takes a minute or two with the IT.
Thank you.
So the process is that you will get a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, and then your presentation, which can be screened, and our procedural officer can move from page to page if you ask her to. That takes about 10 minutes, after which we have 45 minutes left. There are 10 questions to be asked by members of the committee, so just be aware of the time issues. Also, this is screened live on YouTube, so it is something that's transparent that people are able to access. So thank you very much. And when you're ready, please proceed.
Okay, must I keep it in?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. I am, well, as Ahmad said, I'm Sarah Helena Roberts, like a good Afrikaans girl from the Northern Cape. I have 2 Christian names. My father calls me Sureta, and then when I get back home, I'm Osis. So that's why the different names. I grew up in the Northern Cape. They went to university at Free State, and there I obtained B Juris and then later on LLB. And I was a practicing attorney from 1999 till April or end of March 2011. Which in 1 April 2011, I was asked if I would like the opportunity to act as a magistrate. It should have been a 3-month acting stint, which now is resulted in 14 years acting. So I have started in the children's court at that stage. And the reason for the appointment was actually for the backlog project by, well, he's again the Deputy Minister, Andries Snell, because of the new Children's Act that came into operation, the foster care extensions, where they would have been done by an admin process at DSD that were given to the courts. So there was this huge backlog of foster care that had to be done. So that is where I stepped in, and then I actually took over the children's court. Although it's Kuils River District, Kuils River District has 2 courts, Kuils River and Blue Downs. And I sit in Blue Downs, that's in Mfuleni, the court building, but I do both courts, and I'm the only children's court magistrate there. So, thank you.
I think we can go into your presentation.
Okay. When I was asked about a 10-minute presentation, I just want to mention I'm a very practical and hands-on person. So when I looked at the questions or what was asked, the next slide, the vision of the role of the commissioner. Obviously, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. No, it's fine. Okay, can I go? Thank you. Obviously, the core functions is as in the Act that the Commissioners Act 2019 to protect and promote children's rights. That goes without saying. But the question is how to do it, and that my vision would be obviously through policies, which must also, I presume a lot of the departments already have them in place, but then it comes with implementation and then accountability. And I'm of the opinion that the accountability or consequences is actually lacking in a lot of departments or policies that already exist. Through these policies, you have to provide children access to government services, and then again, keep government accountable. A big vision, and if you sit in a children's court, you will always also realize that we have to educate parents on parental responsibilities. I think we tend to focus on the child and the child's needs, but the parents must at some stage take responsibility. I was actually shocked when I heard on the news Monday when Minister Mania said that by Friday, on the 11th at 4 o'clock, 20,000 grade 7 learners have not been registered by their parents for grade 8. And I thought, how is it possible? So parental responsibilities and educating parents and the community is, I think, should also be one of the big visions. This is all outlined in the Commissioners Act and obviously also in the Children's Act, which is Section 4. Then the priorities, as I see it, coming from a children's court background. And I know you will recognize that Department of Home Affairs does not fall under the categories or departments of oversight. But there are so many children in the Western Cape that do not have birth certificates. Children's births are not registered. So they cannot access the services. They are not in school systems. Again, parental responsibilities, because a lot of the parents just don't register. Or the sad part is a lot of the parents don't have birth certificates. So I just of the opinion that Home Affairs must also be included at some stage, even if it's only government level. Without Home Affairs, none of this can actually happen. Then I am very passionate about sport and recreation. We fail the children by not giving them something to do. There are so many children that sit in front of you every day and they have all this potential, but there's nothing. There's no soccer fields, there's no rugby, there's nothing. So sport and recreation is a big issue in the communities, and it gives them an alternative to gang involvement. This morning I had to preside over an 11-year-old boy that refused to go to school and now apparently part of a big gang. He's 11 years old. He was caught with a semi-automatic firearm in his possession. That's how he came to me. And again, mom's working. She isn't there to keep him. There's nothing to do. Then also one of my big concerns and big passions is children in alternative care. That is children in child and youth care centers, both children in need of care as well as child perpetrators, the children coming from the child justice courts. I think I'm of the opinion that they are still the most vulnerable children. In 2022, with the help of the Department of Health and Department of Social Development, we removed 36 extremely disabled children from an unregistered facility in Blackheath in Gailey. And no one, it was operating for years and no one, DSD, I'm of the opinion, knew about that. But only when a mum came to say, listen, I think my child's been neglected, we realized it was an unregistered facility. So those children are still the most vulnerable children. The sad part about that facility is the parents were referred by Tygerberg Hospital. Still want to know how that happened, but that is now the accountability issue. Then I am now also presiding over a matter which, after our unannounced visit, because I tend to do that a lot, I just rock up at CYCC's, an unannounced visit. I also requested a full investigation by Dr. Robert McDonald's office on a child and youth care center in Kuils River with 2 sites, one being also children severely neglected, and the facility itself. Luckily, in this instance, DSD is really assisting, and I get the reports every 3 months, and they are checking up on that. Then strategies. Sorry, no. I do apologize. The qualities and competence of an effective commissioner. For me, it's very important. You have to understand and be aware of the social economic differences in our communities. We do not come all from the same environment. We weren't raised the same. We didn't grow up the same. So is the whole of the Western Cape. What works for one community is not going to work for another community. You also have to know how to use resources, data, human resources, and then accessible to the public. It's not only physical building accessible. The commissioner itself must be a person that is accessible. You must be able to liaise, you must be able to know what's going on, and you must be able to be hands-on. When I drove into town, I'm not from Cape Town, I live in Paarl. So coming to town is stressful for me as well. And then when I got here and I didn't get parking and everything is just, and I thought, okay, if the commissioner's office is in Cape Town, how does someone come here? How do you access or want to complain or want to just discuss things? So that must be maybe something that the committee or the Premier, I don't know who looks at that, but maybe take that into account. Then something that's very important is to be responsive in addressing complaints and inquiries. People want to be heard and they want feedback. And unfortunately, we as the public have that view of government departments. We never hear back. Independent, equipped with authority to act, and must be strong and act decisively to hold all departments accountable. Then strategies. If you're not in the post, I think it's very difficult to now say, okay, this is a 5-year or a year plan. But you have to establish extremely good professional working relationship with partners and stakeholders. This is not a one-man show. And if a person think that this is just a position to tick on your CV or write a new CV, I think they are getting it wrong. It's not about the person, it's about the position. And then also must ensure that there are regulatory framework for government departments and NPOs as well that work with children. There must be oversight monitoring of programs. And I specifically brought in here government and private organizations, because on Monday there was a big news article on a discipline camp, they call it, that 24 children were removed in Mpumalanga, minor children. Apparently the parents sent them there to be disciplined, and 2 of those were 16-year-old pregnant girls. That's a private entity, so who's checking up on them? And that must also be under, or the departments must also take responsibility for that. Then the last thing is mobilize existing resources. There are excellent NPOs doing fantastic work in the communities. We must not reinvent the wheel. Use what there is, especially community-based. They know what's going in their in the communities, and they will be able to act and assist. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to start with the questions. There'll be 10 questions. The first one is from Member Heron.
Thank you. And the first question is, what value does your previous job experience add to the role of the Children's Commissioner?
Thank you. Madam Chair, as I looked at the Commission's Act, I actually realized that is what I do. I just have the luxury of having a stamp saying I'm a magistrate. You must do what I say. The children call me the boss lady, so that's how I explain that to them. But it's actually what a magistrate in a children's court does. You implement the Act, you make sure that things are done, and oversight. I've also gathered the experience. I think I'm good with people, I hope. I know how to liaise with people and children. I'm extremely passionate about children, children's rights, children's voices. And one thing, the 14 years I've learned, is a child's voice must be heard. So non-negotiable in my court, the child must be there. I don't care how old the child is. The child has a voice to be heard. And obviously my legal experience, to read and interpret, I think that's very important, coming to procedures and policies. I would presume that the position would fit a person with legal background. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Member Kaiser Philander.
Thank you very much, Chair. Question 2. What are the 3 biggest challenges that children are faced with in the Western Cape? And how will you, as the Commissioner for Children, approach those issues? Thanks, Chair.
Madam Chair, obviously birth certificates is a big issue for me, but that is something specific. But overall, I think the 3 biggest issues in our communities is poverty and food insecurity. It's sad, but I literally have day-to-day children appearing that cannot tell me when last they ate. Sure, sorry. So having to look at children and they can't tell you if they had the previous night had something to eat. So poverty and food insecurity, and the parents as well. So the second thing I think is crime and unsafe. Children are not safe. Children cannot play in Westbank and Kleinvlei. Children cannot play in the streets. So crime and children are in need of care and protection, and then education or the lack thereof. We are raising a generation of fathers. Let me take that example. 10 years from now, our 15-year-olds are going to be a dad. They can't read, they can't write. And that's the problems in our community. So how I would like to tackle it, get Home Affairs in. And then obviously work with government or NGOs for the lack to assist with aftercare programs, to assist children being in aftercare after school, that they don't have to go home. Sport facilities. There are people in the communities that work fantastic. They have their own soccer teams in Mfuleni. There's a Happy Valley soccer team. They don't even have jerseys to play in. But they get the kids from 2 o'clock. You go to the soccer field and you play. So that is how we have to act. We have to think out of the box. We have to, years ago, things that we didn't work. We have to get solutions. Just a quick example, there's a fantastic NPO in Paarl, Hilltop Legacy. They focus on 2 very poor schools. They've built aftercares for that schools. There are 60 and 80 kids going aftercare, and they identify children that are through education and through sport athletics to get placements in good schools, get bursaries for the kids, and give them something. And I think if we get the private sector involved, that would make a huge difference.
Thank you very much. Member Syed?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for those responses. Tell me, how do you propose then to translate some of the concerns that have been identified by communities into practical solutions, but within the limited constraints of the Children's Commission?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that is where the stakeholders or the departments come into play. I firmly believe that the commissioner should not render services. The commissioner is not someone, it's not DSD, it's not a social worker. They mustn't render the services, but it's important to identify the issues. If you don't identify the issues, okay, what are you going to implement? And then have the departments that you have oversight of get to some workable framework. Again, we have policies, we have all these beautiful things in place, but nothing happens. And that's how the community sometimes see government. Sitting around the table making decisions. Sorry, but that is how the communities and the public see politicians. I'm very sorry to say, but that's the truth. So working and having the relationships that you build to really identify and to act. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. No, in fact,
We've heard a lot worse.
no, in fact, if I may, that's what we should be hearing. That's oversight. No, thank you.
Just wanted to mention, I sometimes do not have a filter.
Don't worry. Member Stevens has the next question.
Thank you, Chair. Given that monitoring and reporting are the aspects of the Commissioner, how would you go about in raising awareness to the department and executive And what monitoring tools will be implemented? How would you manage a situation where government departments or the executive do not want to cooperate with the office of the commissioner? Thank you.
Okay, I think it's two how and if they do not cooperate. Okay. Again, you have to identify the issues. What do you monitor? First, you have to identify what must be monitored. And that's community-based, because issues that the community raised in Umfuleni will not be issues the community raised in Brackenfell, Protea Heights. Those are two of the jurisdictions I preside over, and it's total different children's court matters that come from those two areas. So you have to identify, and then one of the biggest tools I think is human resources. It's fantastic, and I have to say I did Google because when I Googled the commissioner, how do you complain? How do you get to an office? And I saw that, yeah, there's an online form and that you complain or do an inquiry. But if my Googles in Mfuleni do not have internet, they will not be able to access. So that can't be a tool for them. Maybe it will work in Constantia, but it won't work there. So you have to identify the issues and then go again, community-based tools. And the best tools to use is humans. People listen to people. And my pastor once said something very simple, but was profound for me. People need people. And that stuck with me. So then, ma'am, the question regarding not cooperating, like I say, if I had a magistrate stamp, I would just stamp and subpoena you. But I think the government or the departments must buy into what the vision of the commission is. It's not a one-man show, as I said. If you do not have buy-in from the government departments, you are not going to have any success. And listening to government departments, because we are and that's a big problem for our magistrates, and I quite think Mrs. Le Pen would have mentioned that, we sometimes storm into a trial and we are angry at the Department of Education or what has happened, but we never listen. Okay, but this is actually their concerns, that the issues they have. So, and that for me is important. I am a person that likes to resolve issues. I'm not one to would take a court route because I feel that would just define the whole purpose of consultation. But you have to have buy-in, and I'm quite sure I would be persuasive enough to deal with that.
Thank you very much. Member van Wyk.
Yes, how would you ensure that the Children's Act is implemented on the ground to benefit children, and perhaps a practical example?
That's my little Bible that I work with every day. And the new amendment that came into place in July or June last year, it was a tiny amendment, but it made a huge difference. For instance, one of the amendments, it said that a child was a child in need of care and protection if the child was abandoned and orphaned without visible means. That is now struck. It says abandoned or orphaned and has no family to take care of them. So it sounds, yes, when you don't know, it actually made a huge difference on the implementation of foster care, for instance, because now practically if a family member looks after a child that parents are deceased, they can't be placed in that family's foster care. That is where SASSA's top up came into play, because the family that takes care of the child, but it can't be foster care. But the community must be educated on things like that. I frequently do training for social workers, social development. I've requested a few, RCVF did. So I do training for social workers on implementation and how to use the act practically. And then as well as I've extended a hand to the South African Police Service to just sensitize them as well of removal of children. And then I also speak at schools. I'm asked frequently to speak at schools, especially on the Children's Act. The Children's Act, my personal opinion, it's like in Afrikaans we say, it's so wyd soos die Here se genade. It's a beautiful act if you use it properly.
Thank you. Member Walters?
How would you defend the integrity of the Children's Commissioner, and how would you protect the functional independence of the Commissioner?
For me, integrity, I think that's the most important thing, even in the position where I am now in. And if I understand, and if you refer to the office of the Commissioner, the office of the Commissioner is the Commissioner. And if that person doesn't act with integrity, the whole office will never be seen as having integrity. So one must be very mindful of your actions, how you act with people, what you do, and be independent, transparent, very transparent. And then obviously independent. I once, when I was appointed in 2011, my then senior, Mr. Pieterse, sat me down and he said, you have to remember, if you are a magistrate, your personal life is your professional life. And that makes sense because I cannot be this in my personal life and I cannot have a drink on a party and then get in my car and then next morning I have to preside over drunken driving matter. So practically that's it. So you have to be a person of integrity, professional and personal life. I think it must be made very clear to all stakeholders or departments. You cannot, and again, my English is
Certain Afrikaans.
Kan ek dit in Afrikaans sê? My Engels het my gelos. Jy kan nie hierdie boeties vir baadjies ding doen nie. If you cannot act for a friend or you cannot, that's not integrity. How you deal with a person that can do the least for you, that is character. And that is what I, as a member of public and as a presiding officer, would love to see a person in that position.
Thank you very much. Member Heron?
Thank you. The seventh question relates to how the current commissioner has set up a method or a system in her office. So as the Commissioner for Children, how do you view the Child Monitor program? And if you were to change it, how would you involve child monitors and children's sectors? And there's a second part. How will you ensure that initiatives like the Child Government Monitors incorporates children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making process on a municipal and government level?
I actually met the commissioner once at a UNICEF conference where I was invited to, and I do presume the child monitors is the children that assist, lack of a better word. It's a good concept regarding having the voice of the child heard, because it's very difficult if you go to communities to have this input from all the children that want to speak to you. So there must be some kind of forum and that's a good thing, the child monitors. I'm not quite sure. I haven't read anything about that and I haven't followed up, but I would suggest that even that program should be very community based, because again, a child from different circumstances and communities have different views. So I'm of the opinion you can't just have, and I don't even know how many children form part of this program, say for instance 20 children, and that is the voice of the Western Cape children. That's not. A good thing about the forum is also that child, it's not that child's voice that's heard. That child must go back to the community, and that child must bring the community, the children of the community's voice. It is a good concept. I'm just concerned, again, the Western Cape is very big. There are areas that have no idea what's going on. And I think it must be reached out more to those communities as well. I think if you ask someone that lives in Riversdal, is there a commission of children, they would probably don't even know that. So I don't know how far reach those programs are. I would like to see it reach all over, but again, community based. Sorry, I forgot the second part.
The second part was how would you ensure that initiatives like the Child Government Monitors incorporate children's voices and their perspectives are integrated into your work and decision-making processes on a municipal and government level?
I think it's very important, and municipalities play actually a very good, or can play a very good role, because in each, they have student councils. Most municipalities, I know Paul, Drakensberg municipality, has the student council of schools. I don't know, 20 children from schools all over the Paul area that are counselors. And that is a good idea for a child's voice to be heard, because that is children in that community. We can address the issues that's in that community and maybe sit once or twice a year with such forums and request that each councillor or council and municipality set up such a forum in their community.
Thank you very much. We then have Member Kaziphalanda.
Baie dankie voorsitter, maar Roberts is amper daar. Question number 8. Given the high levels of child trafficking in the Western Cape, how would you propose that the Office of the Commissioner for Children would seek to address it? Thank you.
Yes, sure. That is such a huge issue. And I think if you are not working in courts or the police, you do not actually realize the big concern on child trafficking. And again, Home Affairs comes into play. A child that doesn't exist in South Africa, how do we safeguard that child? How do we get that child from point A to point B on a safely? I unfortunately had 2 child trafficking matters in my court recently. And this was now corruption as well, because the child had a birth certificate. Obviously, birth certificate was bought in Brixton. When I realized the child was born in Paarl Hospital and the stamp is Brixton in Gauteng. But again, that's a big issue, and that is also a Home Affairs issue. So just want to, I'm not always bad-mouthing Home Affairs. I have to also admit that I understand why Home Affairs are so, it's difficult to register a child's birth, late registration, because to make sure that it is your child and it's not child trafficking. But they make it so difficult for a father, for instance, to go and register the child. They just send them to court, get a court order. The police must also be very mindful, and they must be vigilant, and they must act on tip-offs. And child trafficking is not always a child that is used for prostitution. Child trafficking is literally babies that suddenly get homes of little babies that get placed with couples that don't have children. And no one follows up on these matters. There are 2 pending in my court now, where I'm starting to ask questions. Why is this private social worker always having a baby available for adoption? So the social workers must be very mindful, the police, and then educate the community, educate the public. Over December, I think there were 2 or 3 newspaper articles of buses that were stopped. One was in Kimberley, 12 o'clock at Shell Ultra. And luckily, one of the petrol attendants just felt, yo, something didn't make sense with these kids. They don't get off the bus. They don't look happy. And he phoned the police. They were all trafficked from Zimbabwe. So the community, again, education, education.
Member Said, question 9.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you for your responses. On a similar practical level, I'm going to ask, what steps would you take as a Commissioner for Children to address the lack of forensic support in sexual and in child abuse cases? And can you perhaps also provide us with an example of similar initiatives that you've led or supported in the past to basically improve response and support for victims of sexual abuse and child abuse?
Thank you. Yeah, it's also unfortunately my day-to-day reality. I think the commissioner must just be, we must all be very mindful. The commissioner or the responsibility of a commissioner is never to intervene and interfere with criminal or police work. Unfortunately, that is why if public starts to interfere with police investigations, that's why a lot of people are found not guilty. So we must be very mindful that whatever steps do not interfere. The forensics is apart from the DNA, that there's a huge backlog. I think there's 140,000 backlog on DNA. There is a process, and I work closely in Blue Downs Court. We have a big sexual offences from court. So the dedicated prosecutors are actually, if they struggle to get victim assessment access reports or victim impact reports for child victims, they approach the children's court, and I have a very good relationship with the social workers who would then assist. Although it's not their job, they would assist to get that impact reports filed at court to speedily. And then also the prosecution can also, they call it, I think, a priority letter that can be attached to a police docket for forensics to speed up forensics, especially if it's a child. So there is processes. And then I'm not interfering but I met the Scalabrini Center. They are a refugee center that work from Cape Town, but they are funded by UNICEF. So they have now twice assisted the court and the social workers with 2 rape cases where both children, 2 separate matters, were both raped by one by the uncle and one by the father. The one girl got pregnant, so the baby was born, and the child literally, the DNA, they told me it would be 2 years for the DNA to come back. And they provided funds. I contacted them, Advocate Chapman, they provided funds. And the social worker, through the children's court, we did the DNA, and the police were gracious enough to accept that DNA. Then something also that we must be very mindful is children should not be, there must never be secondary trauma. It's extremely, for a child to come forward and just to admit that something happened. And children, I firmly believe children don't lie, not if they're 16 and under. Why would the child of 5 years old tell you, my pa het dit gedoen? They don't lie. So we have to be mindful not to put that child through investigations, through secondary trauma. And luckily also there, we have the social workers. Those children are brought to court because they have to be safeguarded. And the social workers working in the areas that under the court are really very, very, very committed. So I would ask them to sit in consultations, not let the parents sit in because mom would take over the consultation, sit in and request the police, FCS, to be mindful as to who the investigating officer is. Don't ask a male to come and speak to a 15-year-old girl that's been raped. simple things like that. But unfortunately, as it stands now in court proceedings, a magistrate are only allowed to interfere or intervene so much.
Thank you. And then our last question is Member Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. How would advocate and support children with special needs to access education so they can live a meaningful post-school life?
Sure, that is, yeah, that's so important. This morning's child of 11 with the gun, he refused to go to school. He's grade 5. And then within 2 minutes, when I spoke to him, I realized he cannot read and write. That's nothing to do with he's been bullied at school. He cannot read and write. So, and apparently the mum asked the school in Kalkfontein, please assess the child. Nothing has happened. They are just too grateful the child has now been taken by the court, because now luckily they can go on. And that is where children fall through the cracks. They are in mainstream schools, but they are not assisted to be assessed and to be placed. And again, there, I am quite sure, Department of Education, Western Cape Education Department has very good policies in place for that. But again, is it implemented, and who takes accountability? And there I know that, the principals hate me in my area, I subpoena them, but it's the principals, it's your responsibility. You have to identify the child. A child that is unruly in class is not necessarily someone that needs to be on Ritalin. Because that, so, and then make those schools accessible. Transport. Because a lot of the schools are not accessible for the person or the caregiver that needs that child to be placed there. I think there's a lot of work, education.
Right. Thank you. That is the questions answered. Thank you. You have. Thank you very much for being here, for your presentation, for answering the questions. We really appreciate that.
I do presume I know.
No, sorry, I was going to get to that. You don't. Sorry, I was going to say. Remember?
Just interesting from that, the whole point of the birth certificates that are not there and the registration of births. What is the size of that problem? Is it 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or whatever? Is it quite a serious problem?
It's actually overwhelming for social workers. Just to give you an example, the Children's Act changed in 2005 already. Section 21 gives an unmarried father acquires full parental rights. So according to Children's Act, they are mom and dad's both guardians. They have exactly the same rights. I cannot get Home Affairs to get a dad to register the child. The clerk just refused to take the application. So, and it's a huge problem. And then we have, I don't know if it's a lack of people just don't care, the parents, but a lot of the children are not living with their parents. They're living with grandparents, family, even neighbors for years. I have now 3 applications on Monday. One girl was born in 2008. She's 17. Her birth's not registered. The other one, 2011 and 2021. So it's literally in my court, and I have a huge jurisdiction. It's about 3 applications a week. And if you look at statistics, Department of Justice love their statistics. It's about 3,850 children went through my court last year. That's the court rolls. And I can guarantee, it's huge. And I can guarantee you, so if you speak to social workers, and schools struggle, and then CYCCs, a lot of children are placed in CYCCs, but the birth certificate, the process was not followed through. And I'm not even talking about immigrant or asylum-seeking children. It's our children. They're not registered. Unknown, baby unknown. that's unfortunate. That's the reality. And if you don't sit in that court or you don't see that. You don't see that. So it's Home Affairs.
I think it's certainly worth thinking about. But thank you very much. And no, we have not received any objections or complaints with your name, so we don't have to do that process. But thank you very much. Sorry, just in terms of the responses, we finish our interviews today. We'll be deliberating next week. So you will be hearing something in the next couple of weeks. Thanks.